Welcome back, everybody, to our show today. This is Chasing the Dream. I'm your host, Ethan Chazin, and I am absolutely thrilled to share with everybody on this program, Stela Lupushor. So, Stella, I'm going to give a brief introduction and then we're going to dive right into our conversation, if that's okay.
Thrilled to be here, Ethan. Looking forward to what's going to emerge.
Stella's a workplace humanist and also a futurist. And she helps organizations to navigate through the turbulent waters of embracing AI, adopting it, but without losing their soul, their humanity. She's an advisor to startups, enterprises, and organizations, as well as governments, on human-centered work transitions. And she's co-authored not just one, but two books. The first, Humanizing Human Capital, and the second, Humans at Work. So Stella, welcome to Chasing the Dream.
So happy to be here.
You talk a lot and you've written about, and you're a subject matter expert in a very perverse topic. And that's this obscene notion of making workplace cultures more humane. And so I wanted to ask you, in your experience, and your mission is to humanize the workplace, how do organizations achieve this when they're being forced or they're reducing their diversity, equity, inclusion commitments? They're mandating return to office policies that are pretty draconian. When they struggle financially, their first reaction is to implement layoffs. And they're using AI and other technology tools to replace human beings. So how do you fight the good fight of humanizing organizations given those challenges?
It is certainly an interesting time to be alive. And from a business perspective, I think we see many shifts and resistance to embrace what's coming, which is a world where human will have even more importance to be treated as a unique, creative, not an asset, not a widget in the workflow, but a really distinct source of business value that gets created. I think it's a sign of natural reaction of the old system, old structures, old processes to push the pendulum back and resist this change, because we are at a cusp, I think, of a very new reality when it comes to what work is and how work gets done and by whom. The human centricity is what transformed businesses who made it their mission to bring that lens to the customer experience and created new industries, new leaders, new market players. And the next iteration of that, the next opportunity and source of value will be bringing that mindset to the workplace environment. We've seen, and I know a lot of people will probably dive into this deeper, but a lot of people are talking about AI and what impact that will have and how much more efficient organization can be and how we don't need humans anymore because 95% of the workflow can be done by the agents. But we've seen this with outsourcing. The more you outsource the work, the manufacturing, the thinking in different regions, the more fragile possibly your supply chain can become, the more reliant you are on different talent pools that may not necessarily be as sustainable in the long term, and you need to replace them much faster. The friction that comes with the reintegration of work now is that next wave. We will outsource our thinking to AI. If you just outsource certain pieces of the activities, it may help in the short term, but it will make your ability to intervene or create something completely new a lot more difficult. So data can help to bring more humanity in a way, in a strange way too, because you can use analytics to understand what it's like to be a worker here. What are the things that can make you more productive, more creative, more independent, more effective, and how can you reduce the friction for you as a worker to be better, to accomplish whatever it is that the company expects you to do. And looking through the lens of the worker experience and bringing that data and saying, if we have the opportunity to increase the productivity of somebody by so much and reduce the annoyance that they experience in interacting with your system, they will be able to deliver the customer a much better experience. They will be able to have more time to self-develop and learn new things such that they can be better. And here's how this will show up in your business outcomes.
Yeah, all good. And I hear what you're saying. And for the uninitiated, it sounds good intellectually, but I hear two things that are in opposition. One is the drive in organizations to increase employee performance and productivity, meaning use those technology tools to increase something. But you talk a lot about freeing up people to be more creative. And those seem at odds. And even your organization reframe work. You're a subject matter expert and a visionary and a futurist in how you help people get more creative. It doesn't sound to me like organizations are focused on maximizing creativity, rather to increase the return on employee investment vis-a-vis they are assets. So how do you shift mindset? What are the tactical tips you suggest to organizations to allow people to be more creative? Because it sounds to me like the only advice you can give them is to make their people have more control over their work. And that to me sounds like, I know from experience, that's a fight.
The frame that we typically look through is the job, right? What is the job? What is the job description saying? What are the tasks and activities that you need to perform? And we use that as a lens to then drive a lot of other things. Like, are you performing against that? Are you progressing up the career in the job family that you belong to? How are we compensating that? I think there's a lot of structures around the concept of what the work is that are getting in the way of creating that space for creativity. Frankly, if we think about jobs, have we ever worked in a job that matches the job description past day one? Rarely. That's usually a filter to filter people out as opposed to filter people in. Once we get in the company, there is a lot of fluidity, unless you're on a very, in essence, roboticized activity that you have to perform things based on a standard operating procedure. The rest of it is a lot of subjectivity around what needs to get done, how you do it, with whom you do it. You have teams, you have organizational dynamics, you have politics you need to deal with. All of that is work in a way. We have now the opportunity to reimagine the definition of what the work is and how you do it and in what context. And HR plays a huge role in helping organizations reimagine that, right? You may have a tool that works or is expecting you to perform some activities, but that tool is no longer representing the reality, and the measurement systems and the way you get compensated, all of that doesn't follow. So helping managers understand the workflow and saying, what are the problems that we really are trying to solve for? And who is the most optimal worker to get that work done? Sometimes it's a human being, sometimes it's a chatbot, sometimes it's a new AI agent that can perform the work done. You need to route those activities to the right worker to get the work done. And then that creates the space for people to be more creative and maybe solve better problems or think, or even have the space to read a book such they can upskill themselves or reach out again to that customer. But the conversations, I think, have to start at the team level. A lot of times we assume that the leadership knows what happens on the ground and how to solve the problems, as opposed to giving the agency and ability to make some of this rewiring of the work, leaving it to the team and the manager and the individual themselves.
You talk a lot about the need to readjust the work itself, the outputs. I have a burning question for you, which is, I see there being two philosophies around the future of acquiring talent. And one is you continue to hire off a job description, which to me seems outdated because a job description is a finite piece of work with roles and responsibilities. So you're recruiting for a set of skills in that moment. Whereas the other second philosophical approach is to hire people who are creative, innovative, problem solvers, so that they have behaviors and characteristics. So then you bring in those people because those are the more desirable attributes. And then you teach them to do the work,
Yeah.
knowing that the work is going to change, but the attributes are consistently needed in the future. When you, as a futurist, think about the future of employees and work, what's your thought process about helping organizations navigate what to look for in their workforce?
I think the answer will depend on the company itself, right? If you think of a existing organization with embedded cultural norms and practices and policies and formalized descriptions of what it is that they do and how they go to market and how they engage and value system, all of that stuff, the answer may be very different than a new company that is just starting now. We see a lot of organizations with very few employees with significant market capitalization that are, I think, an emergent and a representative sample of new models of performing work, where you have highly talented, highly concentrated set of skilled individuals who are going in a vertical way to solve a specific problem, and they are augmented and enabled by a lot of technology to do that work. Some refer to that as a micro team concept. It's a new type of organizational structures that are technology first solutions that then enable some of these creative people to solve big problems. The more traditional organizations, I think, will have a slower pace of transforming and rethinking how they do it, just because everything is designed to preserve that structure. If you think of our organizations as systems, right? It's a complex system. It has a lot of reinforcing loop. It has a lot of practices set up in a way that preserves it and preserves the existing way of operating. And how they hire is going to take time for that to change. How they manage and promote people, how they create a team environment is going to change, but it'll change significantly slower. So that's where the adaptation is important. And that's where you see a lot of conversations around pilots. A lot of companies are doing pilots and integrating AI, but the pilots do not yield significant results just because they hit that resistance and the systemic structures that are preventing it from adapting, right? If people are not motivated to change just because the way the promotion is designed, the way the manager and the goal setting is set, people are not going to change. They're going to say, why would I stick my neck or integrate this agent to be more productive if the rest of the system is not designed to enable me to do that, right? So that's where the time will tell how some of these companies will survive, if they will survive. That was long rambling.
But you're talking about survival and the need. There's something that I pick up on. You use words of how do organizations preserve themselves. But I'm curious, when you look out into the future, we're already in a state of our business where it's just rife with toxicity, chaos, fear, uncertainty. And then you talk about the need to have time to adapt. But organizations don't have time. You and I know that. They need to respond now. So, how do you build a more human workforce that's able to adapt and navigate the fear and the chaos and uncertainty when, as you said yourself, organizations are also struggling to preserve themselves? It doesn't seem like you can have both persevere, but also adapt and transform. They sound like they're at odds with each other almost.
That's the reality we live in, right? It's forcing us to rethink the definition of value. What is value? And how we define as a company that we're creating and delivering on that value. And that's where the leadership needs to really think or rethink that, because customers are changing and their expectations are changing. the market is changing, the environment and the economy and the political environment is changing. So redefining what is it that we are here to do as an organization, it's the first conversation. And then the next layer is how are we going to deliver that, and what the workforce expects to be able to deliver on that value to your consumers or whoever is paying for what the company is producing. When we think about workforce employment value proposition, right? A lot of companies say we have all of these great benefits, we have a great culture, we have, I don't know, the leadership development opportunities for you. And then you end up starting to work for that company, and inside it looks very different. But the assumption is that everybody expects a certain bucket of those value proposition elements, when in fact we all have very different expectations. We as humans, depending on our life stage, may expect more flexibility at certain parts in our life when we have children or we have caregiving responsibilities. Maybe at some point in times we want to maximize the amount of money we're making, but in other cases we want to just work for a company that invests in our development and builds our skill set. Or in some cases, we want to leave a legacy and attain some self-transcendence, right? We all very unique and have different expectations from what the organization is there to provide us. We can use a lot of the analytics and understanding and even engaging conversations, like what is it that makes you want to work here and how we can maximize that for you. The more we can lean into aligning what the company value is and what it is that you're going to get here and integrate that into all the decisions we make as an organization, the more likely we will attract the individuals that are compelled by that value proposition. So maybe you say, you're not going to get the most money here. You're not going to get ability to have self-transcendence, not should some public companies be the place for that, but you'll get the ability to be employable for life, because we will train you to be adaptable. We will give you the environment to experiment. We'll give you access and mindset for you to help yourself grow all the time. And that's what you'll get here. And people who are attracted by that type of mindset will come to work and likely be able to thrive and help your company adapt as well.
I hear what you're saying, and I already understand the absolute truism of everything you say. But if I put on my other side, let's pretend I'm schizophrenic, and I put on my hat of business owner, and I hear that you said, I need to customize the value to every one of my people when they join the organization. And sure, there are analytics to use to figure out how to do that. But at the end of the day, Stella, my job as the founder or the CEO or the executive director is to maximize profit.
Yeah.
That does not sound, Stella, that sounds to be opposite of this need for me to personalize what each person gets out of the relationship with me, the employer. How do you talk through that that contradiction in end goal between the employer and the employee?
So the framing right now is we have HR, and HR is responsible for the employee experience, and they will do the talent acquisition and hiring. They will do the onboarding, they will do the development, promotion, process management, compensation, all of the things that usually HR does. That mindset is really about HR's efficiency and what HR does and the processes. It doesn't look through the lens of the worker. What it's like for me to discover you, the company X, and what you offer to me. And just because I have the talent that you absolutely need that will help you be the most, obtain the highest revenue, how would you compel me to come to you? What it's my experience to go through the recruitment and get that job offer or not? What it's like for me to come cross the threshold of your company and being onboarded and having the right resources to be productive very quickly? Am I interacting with my peers and managers in a way that makes me the most productive? Am I promoted at the right time or too soon before I'm ready and therefore I'm going to burn out, or too late when I'm bored and I want to quit and I want to disengage? So looking at the lens of the worker experience through the worker view, and then linking a lot of these moments along that life cycle to the business outcomes that matter. If you care about revenue growth, what type of workers we need that have the highest impact on that revenue growth, and how we create that experience for them to deliver on that as fast as possible. Usually we think about retention. Can we retain people? But retention doesn't, or attrition doesn't happen overnight. People don't quit overnight, right? They quit in little paper cuts. You hire them, something happened. First time they don't pay attention, the next time they start paying attention, and then they get annoyed, and then they reach a point where they say, I'm done. I had 3 managers this year. I can no longer tolerate this chaos. How can I either disengage and do the least amount of possible because it doesn't matter anymore, or find another job? So looking at all the experiences people have and saying, where the likelihood of those paper cuts to occur, and how can we put an HR process in place or some interventions that prevents that from happening? Can we create a more stable team environment and focus on retention of managers, because that retention makes a huge impact on teams' stability and ability to produce. So it's shifting the conversation on a side, looking at it through the lens of the worker, and then tying to the outcomes that matter for the business, and then putting interventions in the right places to maximize that outcome.
Yeah, okay. And so yeah, the
You're
follow-up
not convinced?
question yeah, no, I love this. You've got one eye in the present as an expert in this field, but you're also looking to the future. So I'm just getting all these questions because I'm thinking about what I know to be the present, and I'm begging for what does the future look like? If we talk about revenue generation as like the benchmark. So a business owner or an executive would say, Stella, at the end of the day, my job is to measure people's performance and productivity as it pertains to contributing to impact on revenue. But then what is your counter position, or how do you reframe that conversation when you're talking about employees who possibly don't have in their job the ability to impact revenue? So let's say client-facing roles or back office roles. I can't point to revenue I created. So how do you talk about other ways to measure employees' impact if they can't prove that they're touching the revenue?
Yeah. This is a challenge, and I'll describe it maybe through the lens of HR.
Okay.
Because HR typically is one of those back office functions and is the one that I'm more familiar with, so I can speak a little bit more credibly. So when we think, again, to continue on the same trail of measurements related to the worker experience, right? That's a bucket of measurements, and that can be captured through the workers' experience at work, satisfaction, retention, outcomes they produce. So there are ways to quantify those revenue producing individual outcomes and performance. You have business, the revenue, the customer satisfaction, the NPS score, the market share, all of those things. So that's a separate bucket of measurements. The HR is really about the programs they deliver. So now you can put the HR programs effectiveness in the middle and say, is there a linkage between this intervention that we've deployed and how those first 2 buckets interact with each other? Have we delivered on either ability of that individual to be more engaged and more satisfied, such that they impacted the business outcome in a better way? If not, should this program even exist? Do we replace it with something else? So that's the HR's revenue or impact on the business outcomes. So it's not direct, but it's an indirect way of linking the other 2 business indicators and proving that we have an effective program in place where we have a way of impacting those two's interaction.
I heard what you said, and I have a certain vision. I just want to ask you if I'm on track or off base. I just heard you talk about reframing work so that an organization achieves all three levels of goal. I heard you say the highest level, which is strategic business-wide goals.
Yeah.
And then I heard you talk about HR ensuring teams achieve their goals. And then, if I'm not mistaken, I heard you tie through the need to have individual goals, which kind of go up to team goals, which go up to business goals. Is that how you
Yeah,
frame this for organizations who push back on this?
absolutely. Absolutely. Because you have to tie them all, right? HR doesn't own employee experience. Managers own, right? People work in teams, people work in the systems that they have their activities automated, they work within physical facility. HR only is an enabler and in some cases a police of making sure there's compliance with the laws and regulation, but in many cases is really facilitating the right type of motivators for people to follow the procedures or the standard operating manual. So the more you can focus on where the work gets done and who the workers want to or are engaging with and setting the right type of goals for that performance, the more HR will be able to enable you to do that. Because HR sets compensation practices, but it's manager ultimately that decides how much money is getting paid. HR can set up coaching and definition of what a promotion looks like, but ultimately is the business that decides whether that promotion is warranted and whether the person perform according to the expectations. So you really need to align all of those. People very rarely want to spend much time interacting with HR, if ever.
I guess that goes to the traditional or the historical challenge HR has had in terms of justifying their seat at the management table is they're tactical. They focus on the tasks. You said like benefits, payroll, administration, but now they have to think differently almost about the future of
Yeah,
their workforce. And that almost sounds to me like you're asking them to transform their role.
it's a huge task. And I think there are little signs that you start seeing in the media about HR managing not just human resources, but it's both human and digital resources. And it's
Mm.
about orchestrating work across human, digital, robotic resources. It is agentic world that is emerging. Do you need an HRIS system to manage both the human, but also the agents and keep inventory of all of those? How do you reimagine activities that now are transformed and you have a bunch of digital agents doing the work? What do people do with their extra time that is being formed? How do you reallocate the value that gets created as a result of this agentic interaction? So it's like a lot of big philosophical questions that HR is being pushed into gently and sometimes forcefully. But I think we have to step in and start engaging in those debates. This technology is evolving really fast, much faster than previous general purpose. And it's a big transformation that it's inherently very human. Previously, we would automate supply chains, we would integrate global multinational sites, we would increase the throughput of facility just because we kept the light on for 24/7. We have machinery. Now, this type of AI and the emerging technologies are inherently human, and transformation is bottom up a lot of times because it's the individual themselves who needs to figure out how they can change what they do in the best way that creates more space for them to be focused on important things and more human things, building relationships, creating that value in a different way, having the time for self-development and adaptation. So CEOs are not going to be the ones who say, you shall, because it's the work itself and how it's being done and what it's being defined as is changing.
Yeah, yes. You just said something that I'd be remiss if I didn't jump all
Yeah,
over so that
yeah,
other people make sure they heard what you said.
yeah.
Because what you said, I think, is fundamental to the transformation of the future of the organization. You said it's the individual themselves who have to figure out how to perform the work. So, in other words, it's the individual's role to re-architect the work. So, how do you explain to organizations that for that to happen, there needs to be a new dynamic in work where they give up control to their people so that their people have more autonomy,
Yeah.
as well as you recruit the right skills for people who have the ability to come into a job, assess the work, do the work, and then to evolve the work. Because
Yeah.
that's different than historically how we filled roles.
It's a broad spectrum of experimentation that needs to be enabled. And I see this in some of my customers. A lot of conversations, for the most part, when it comes to AI adoption, is about guardrails and accuracy and hallucinations and how immature some of the, and I'm referring mostly to generative AI and deploying that. And let's face it, everybody's using ChatGPT, especially in knowledge work. I see it in my students, I see it in every clients, they use it on the phone.
Yeah.
So putting guardrails matter. You have to have a kind of a responsible adoption of this technology, but when it comes to the experimentation, you really need to encourage that. And the change is contagious. So if you allow people to say, here's the sandbox where you can play, and here are the things you can do with it, and then allow people to share with each other, here's what I did, and here's how I used it, and make it seem that it's safe to have a conversation around it and share with each other. And then that'll trigger ideas for others. Say, oh, I can do that for myself too. And by the way, I know somebody who 5 minutes ago learned this new skill. I know who is the expert for me because they're just 5 minutes ahead of me in this expertise. And it's safe for me to go and ask them how to troubleshoot. It's creating that sandbox for people to play with it. If I can learn how to create the form, or I can ask it to help me troubleshoot an Excel formula, what else can it do for me? You trigger that momentum for people to say, I can take on bigger challenges and push the limits on some of this technology. And then the most important encouragement, however, has to be you don't just offload your mental thinking. You don't offload just because it's faster. There is an art and a science to using it effectively as a learning partner, somebody who's going to challenge you, as a coach, as a tool to role play certain things. Is preserve what is truly unique about you as a human and use it for everything else that machine should have been doing that in the first place.
We touched on such a broad array of topics, and we've talked so conceptually in a broad range that I wanted to wrap up our conversation to say, if somebody wanted to reach out to you right now and say, Stella, I heard what you had to say, and I want to talk to you about best advice that you can give me to create a sandbox of experimentation in my organization, how would they reach out to you and schedule time to have that conversation?
Thank you for the opportunity to share that. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me. Also, email is easiest. It's Stella with one L at reframe.work, WORK.
So just in case anybody missed it, no worries. I'm going to put all of Stella's contact details. Just go into the description below. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your experience and your kind of vision about where we are now and then where we're going in the future to make work more humanistic.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was such a fun conversation. And thank you for pushing and debating. I love this. I love this format. And I hope your followers continue to pay attention to the speakers that you're bringing on, because you're really bringing that lens and engaging in this type of conversations.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And if you like everything that Stella and I were talking about, this very kind of lively debate, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all back here real soon.